As we head into the final sessions, what I want to do now is share a few critical thoughts on our theme for the Roundtable this year that I expect us to leave here with. We've had incredible speakers, we've had incredible panels, and I want to sort of weave a story to bring all of that together. And I hope, as I spoke about earlier when I welcomed us here, that it really puts fire on that burning bush. And of course, the rest of the sessions that we have today. So that's what I'm going to do over the next 15 minutes or so. There's an old idea that the kingdom of God is a state of consciousness, and that state of consciousness exists inside of us. Our goal with the Roundtable is very simple. It's to awaken that consciousness in each and every one of us, that we may walk around this world with the full consciousness of the authority we carry, especially when we don't have external proof for it. One of the things that we tend to do is we wait for external proof in the form of status, titles, fame, wealth, for us to believe that we're people whose lives are worth anything. But what is this world going to look like if each of us were conscious of the power that we carry, the authority that we have, even before we have any proof for it? Our theme for the Roundtable this year is competing for the future. So, what does it mean to compete for the future? To compete for the future means to, and like Kamsi said, to bear your yoke in your youth. And it's not my idea. It's an old biblical idea by, Prophet Jeremiah. So, in the book of Lamentations, the prophet Jeremiah encouraged the people of Judah to embrace suffering, difficulty, and discipline as an integral part of their lives, especially when you're young. Especially when you're young and your character is being formed. And the reason for why is very simple. When we're young, the numerous difficulties that we experience and the character that we build as a result of confronting these difficulties, they define us permanently. I think after a certain window period in your life, it's very, very, very difficult to change anything about your life. So now is the time. And we had the conversation earlier, when I spoke to George, and he described going through a lot of adversity in a place like Peckham, but deciding that he's going to weave out a story out of that the world is going to celebrate. And that's exactly what he means when the difficulty we experience in our youth defines us, and we choose to make a decision for what that definition is going to be. And there's a big difference between voluntarily deciding that you're going to take on responsibility and discipline, and you're going to embrace that on your own without external situations warranting that, and being whacked in the face by it. I mean, by virtue of being Nigerian, we're all whacked in the face by difficulty every day. But our spirit knows the difference. And the reason why I'm saying this is we need to voluntarily decide to do that. Our spirit knows the difference. It's the difference between being a lion and being a sheep, right? The voluntary acceptance of responsibility, even when we don't necessarily need to, because for some of us, our lives are great and maybe we don't need to do that extra thing that everyone is doing because they have to survive. But that voluntary adoption of discipline and responsibility, of course, I'm going to show I'm talking about this. It defines us permanently. It builds our character. It prepares us for the vicissitudes of life that we would undoubtedly encounter. One of the great things about being young is you have a lot of potential. But one of the not great things about being young is most of the difficulty you face in your life is still in your future. So you better be ready for that. And you better be someone who can hold other people down, hold your family down, hold your friends down when it's time, for you to confront difficulty. And doing so voluntarily prepares you for when you have to ultimately, sort of do it against your will. There's an old injunction that unless we become as little children, we'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. I don't care, it doesn't matter, let me put it that way, whether or not you believe in the kingdom of heaven. But what that means is we have to regain the primitive perceptions of trust and complete dependence on the Father and the purity of heart that we had as children, as a gift when we were children, in order for us to inherit this kingdom. The point I'm trying to make to start with is it's going to be very difficult for us to bear our yoke in our youth if we don't have a core set of beliefs. To put it even more plainly, it will be very difficult for you to bear your yoke in your youth without complete reliance on God. And if you're in this room and that's an aspect of your life you're yet to get in order, you would really struggle. You will struggle to find a source of meaning that sustains you through the entirety of your life. So I encourage you to, fix that. But back to, Prophet Jeremiah, because there's a reason why I'm saying this. Back in his day, he was referred to popularly as a prophet of doom, because a lot of his prophecies were warnings of severe consequences of doom on the people of Judah as a result of their persistent sin, idolatry and disobedience to God. And quite frankly, while reading that, it reminded me a lot of Friedrich Nietzsche, who some of you may know. So Friedrich Nietzsche was an atheist philosopher who was referred to as the 20th century prophet of doom. So towards the end of the 19th century, he wrote a lot of books. I mean, that's how he gained the title, as a prophet. A lot of works, books, and publications predicting how the next 100 years were going to go. And they were really, really ugly. But what's funny was every single prediction he made about how the next 100 years will go from a sociocultural perspective came to pass. So that's why he reminds me a lot of, Prophet Jeremiah in the Bible. So he was an atheist, and some of us may have heard, the philosopher who proclaimed that God is dead. So that was Friedrich Nietzsche. And what he said specifically when he said God is dead was, God is dead, God remains dead, and we've killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to cleanse ourselves? I'll tell you this, 5 years after he made the proclamation that God was dead, he got pneumonia, had a stroke, developed dementia, and ran mad. 10 years after, he died in abject poverty and alone at the age of 55. So I'm saying that in case there's any of you who may be inclined to think that God is dead. But speaking seriously, his proclamation of the death of God was not one that was triumphant. It wasn't a triumphant declaration of God. It was him mourning because, as opposed to what a lot of people think, he was a great friend of the church. He was a great friend of the church in the sense in which a friend holds you most accountable. That was exactly what he did for the church back in his day. So it was him mourning the rejection of the religious and spiritual foundations that had previously provided meaning and coherence to Western society. Because as a result of advancements in science and technology and new inventions and, the models of capitalism that started to, come to light in continental Europe back in the day, people abandoned their roots. And for him, he was mourning the death of God in that sense. So, and that's very similar to what Prophet Jeremiah did back in his day for the people of Judah. The reason why I say all of this is because our generation is at a critical inflection point. Our world is shaking in a way that's new, in every single way possible. For example, it's nearly criminal in many parts of the world to say that there is a biological difference between men and women. And listen, if anyone can get you to believe that there's no difference between a man and a woman, they can get you to swallow any lie. So the truth is under assault across cultures. It's seeping into our societies. And that's just where it's getting started because it's going to get worse. And that's why this idea of competing for the future is necessary, because we can't just be passive participants in the future that we're going to live in. There's no sight that's more terrible than watching people complain, but simultaneously do nothing to change the situations that they're complaining about. That's why we have to compete for the future. We need a new set of realizations. And that's why the Roundtable exists, because we need a new set of realizations. A new set of realizations that would help us close the gates to the demons of the future. Because if we don't, then they are going to come rushing down and we're all going to be eaten. And I hate to sound gory. So, compete for the future. What exactly is the future? What does the future mean? What do we mean when we say the future? It means very many things, and we all have conceptions of what the future means. The future is what we contend with. We don't exactly contend with today. Reason why is today is known. Today is done. There's no adventure in our lives when we live just for today. The reason why we're here, the reason why we work so hard is not for today, because today is done. It's because of tomorrow. It's because there's something that calls us forth, that beckons on us. We know we have to answer. And we get anxious because we don't exactly know how to answer that in the best way possible. And that's really what it means when we say our lives is an adventure. I'm defining the future. What else is the future? The future is potential. It is the well of infinite possibility itself. The future is the water that brings forth life. It's the life more abundant that's promised in the ancient text. It's the unstructured day. It's the unstructured day that makes itself manifest when you wake up. Because when you wake up in the morning, what presents itself to you is a vast field of indeterminate opportunity. And that's why we're a little anxious when we wake up. That's why we're a little nervous, because we have things to contend with. We have things to compete for, things that have not yet come into being. And we know that what we are called to do when we wake up in the morning is to call forth those things from our future and bring them into the present. And the reason why we're anxious is because we don't know exactly how to do that. And we need to build that structured order from which we extract the future. So all of those things are what we mean by the future. So practically, how do we all compete for the future? How do we compete for the future? There are three things I'm going to say. The first is we need to find an aim that's worth pursuing and commit everything we can towards that aim. Your aim would always change over time, and that's okay. Not just is it okay, it's necessary for your aim to change over time. But when you have something that's interesting to you in the moment, do everything you can. Commit your whole being towards making it work. It's very interesting. Three of us read more than 1,500 applications to the Roundtable. And when I read some applications, I wonder, why bother applying? Because you have this thing, you claim you want to come to, and it's a very small microcosm that explains what I mean here. But you're asked to a question that asks you, for example, tell us about yourself. Be very detailed, be very extensive. And you write 2 answers. Why bother completing 19 questions? The point here is we're not giving it everything we can. Yes, we have an aim. Yes, we're interested, but how well are we showing up? We're not doing everything we can. So we mouth the words sometimes that, oh yeah, I have this goal, and oh yeah, I'm trying to do all of these things, but I don't have investors. It's just not true. You're not bringing your best self to I'm not yelling at all of you, but you know what I mean, right? We're not bringing our best selves to the table. And we all could be doing that. We all could. You don't need to be the most technically competent person. But there's a very big difference between someone who just applies sheer effort and someone who doesn't. And someone who applies sheer effort is almost always going to outcompete the person who doesn't in the long run, no matter how talented they are. So, if our future is something like a horizon, an unending horizon of plenitude and possibility, because that's what it is. We earn a place in the future by doing something that's akin to carving out real estate for ourselves in the future. So the question here is, based on the aims you have for your life now, what sort of place in the future are you going to hold? You cannot conceive a meaningful future without an aim. It goes without saying. And you know what's fun? That aim could be an aim. It's an aim. It needs to be an aim that's strong enough to get you out of bed. And that aim could be anything. That's a really cool thing. There's no one but you gets to decide what you spend your life working on. You don't need the permission of any human being. It's like, how liberating is that? How freeing is that if we understood that we don't need that? My brother and I, we built a company that worked with hundreds of thousands of small businesses across every nook and cranny of this country. Right? And one of the things that surprised me when we started to work with small businesses was just how hard they worked. They worked Monday to Saturday. They were at their shops at 7 a.m. They got back home at 9 p.m. They took 2-week holidays in December, and that was it. They were right back at it. And for me, it is, why are people who are selling mops and used washing machines working so hard? Why are they getting out of bed like it's their first day at school? And then it struck me that they found a way to tie their life's purpose to that. And so for them, it wasn't about selling mop sticks. It was about ensuring that their children were able to receive education that they never had. It was about ensuring that their kids were classmates with the kids of men and women who looked down on them 5 years ago. It was about breaking generational cycles of failure. That's why, wow. But what if that's all of us? What if we took something that's so simple, so mundane, like selling mops, and we weaved around it and aimed at so noble that if we succeed, we leave the future better. And if we pursued it with everything we have, it will transform us so deeply and so completely that you will need a new name. That's how Abraham becomes Abraham. That's how you compete for the future. You have to wrestle your way into the future. You have to contend with yourself. You have to contend with yourself for the future, because it's not just handed to us. Quite frankly, quite honestly, it's not a byproduct of the passing of time. It's not just that, because everyone grows old, but not everyone has a future. Or at least, not everyone has a future that's worth looking forward to. And it's up to us to make that decision. And it's interesting because some of us come from families where if we don't do everything we can to break those cycles of whatever cycles exist in our families, we are doomed to fail. So it's up to us to make those decisions for who we want to be and how we want to lead our future. And that's how we find an aim. You don't find an aim or lead a meaningful life necessarily by praying for ease or by expecting. I was self-reflecting, about a very specific task I was working on that I expected to just be easy. And then the question I asked myself is, Kennedy, why do you expect this to be easy? Why? Why do you deserve for this to be easy? You've never done it. And that's many of us, quite frankly. Many people come to talk to me, and I'm like, why do you think this is going to be easy? Why do you think you deserve, the best of the best, and you've put in just 2 months of work, and it's not working, and you're angry and complaining about that? That's just a really bad way to set up aims and a bad mindset with which to compete for the future. Great things are going to take time, and we have to be diligent and patient enough to walk our way towards that and play the long game. We don't compete for the future by praying for ease. We don't compete for the future by waiting for someone to come and marry us off and make our lives happily ever after. That's a weak thing to aim for. That's an incredibly weak thing to aim for. We find that aim by looking inwards into the things that spark intrinsic wonder within us, and by trusting that our pursuit of those things that spark wonder within us will lead to a noble outcome. It will lead to a great outcome if we just pursue that. So it's not by, you don't find that aim by looking towards what other people think is cool or what's hot in the moment or what your friends think will look good on you aesthetically and make your Instagram feed pop and make your LinkedIn look cool. That's a bad way to find what to aim for. Second thing, you need to firm up an identity. We need to firm up an identity and be bold about that identity. We need to anchor our lives on strong beliefs. So it's through beliefs that we firm up identity. And believing in anything that matters is a zero-sum game. What I mean by that is, so when you believe in something, it necessarily means that you cease to believe in everything else that is opposed to that thing. You have to make those trade-offs. But our generation, we don't love to make trade-offs. We say things like, two things can be true at the same time. Yeah, no. Two opposing things can be true at the same time. And just look at the life of anyone who believes that two things can be true at the same time. They are just a walking paradox. There's multiplicities of inconsistencies in their lives. They don't like themselves very much. Their husbands or wives don't like them very much. Like, no one likes them. No one wants to imitate that. So two things can be true at the same time. If you find that you tend to agree with most things you see or hear, or your identity is fluid. When you're in church, it's different. When you're at home, it's different. When you're in Nigeria, it's different. When you're abroad, it's different. Your anchor is probably not strong enough, and we need to fix that. Your life can't just be a tattered banner that's blown about by the wind of your own whim or your own insecurity, and you're longing to fit into places where you have no business fitting in. Right? That's not what we're called to do. Your life is way more than that. Please, this is not a call to be foolhardy and to assume that, oh, I'm always right, because there's a sense of arrogance that can seep in. Not at all. If anything, it's quite the opposite, because if you're intellectually honest, you know how wrong you've been about things you've held to be true. But what happens is, when you have a belief, you take a stance, and as you learn new information, you update the knowledge system with which you live your life. And it opens you up to being corrected, which you need desperately when you're wrong, because you're going to be wrong very many times. So it's incredibly important that we're people who firm up an identity. You know, I grew up in Calabar, as many of you here know, and I went to a senior secondary school where I had really great teachers, really, really great teachers, and they instilled in me and my classmates just a grandiose sense of imagination and possibility, and they made us think that you really could do anything you want to. The only problem is if you work hard enough, you're going to get it. They had an ethic of hard work, which they overemphasized, but it was really helpful. And, there's a part of me that was a little envious of people who grew up in big cities, but I didn't spend much time thinking about them, because I assumed that they had teachers like mine who made me believe that anything short of greatness is, you not doing enough. And so around when I was 16 years old, I started to travel across the world to some of the best universities, and I spent a lot of my teenage years with some of the smartest students from those universities. And one of the things I realized was it was a very deep conflicting feeling within me as I started to interact with them. On the one hand, I was very impressed with how smart they were and how technically competent they were. But on the other hand, I felt let down. I remember vividly feeling let down by how little they knew who they were. It's this idea that a prince without knowledge of his royalty is no different from a slave, even though he owns the whole estate. That's what having an identity does for you. It builds you up. You understand who you are, whether or not you have external proof for it, whether or not you have a job, and it decouples you from social appellations and the things that the world praises you for, which are important, which you should work towards, but it decouples you from that. That's what firming up an identity does for you. The third, last but not the least here, is sacrifice the present for the future. That's how we compete for the future. There's not much to be said on this point, quite frankly, because most of our loved ones have told us that. But what I'm going to say is, it's not optional. We must make a sacrifice. Yeah, and it's different for different people. But you probably know what sacrifice you need to make. And it's important you make them now, because if you don't, then the magnitude of sacrifices you probably would have to make in the future, it may just be too much. It will take you out completely. But the cool thing here is, in sacrificing the present for the future, we build up, we find the self-regard that sustains us through difficulty. Because when difficulty walks in the door, the first thing that flies out of the window is our dignity and our self-regard and self-respect. But in building that practice of being someone who is willing, even when you don't have to, sacrifice today for tomorrow, you're proofed up against that, against losing your self-regard and becoming desperate and making decisions on the fly on the basis of desperation when difficulty walks through the door, as it inevitably will in your life. So, they're already telling me my time is up, but ladies and gentlemen, a prince without knowledge of his princehood and his royalty is no different from a slave. Maybe the reason why we're sometimes the aimless slaves who wander blindly in the wilderness looking for golden calves to worship is because we've lost sight of the promised land. And we maybe have abdicated the sacrificial service of responsibility that's needed for us to make meaning of our lives. If each of us did everything that we needed to do, we won't have need for a king. Our destinies, no human being has power over our destinies. We're responsible for our destinies. We're responsible for the destinies of other people around us. We're the people who install the kingdom of heaven on earth. That's exactly who we are. So we're not here at the roundtable to give you a template for your life, for a grand plan for your life that you can easily plug and play. Amarachi, I see you. I'm almost done. We're not here at the roundtable to give you that template that you can plug and play, and no one can give you that. No human being can give you that. But we're here at the roundtable to meditate. We're here to meditate communally about what each of us needs to do as the captains of our own ship to sail the entire fleet towards the promised land. May our 40-day journey not take us 400 years. So help us, God. That's a good place to stop.